I'm going to talk about building solution-focused knowledge, a systemic approach for structuring reality, as is already told. First, I wanted to say that I'm not used to have a presentation in English, so if you have some troubles to understand me, but please raise your hand, and it will be a pleasure to say it again or to ask for help. So, solution-focused knowledge and systemic approach. How these notions come together. That's a point that I will talk about today. I thought this topic would be interesting because we are all here together talking about multidisciplinarity, intercultural communication. We have our own fields of research, but we know the need to communicate it. We know the need to connect everything we know to have solutions, I think. I mean, we are all looking for some ideas, if no solutions, but new perspectives. And the kind of solution I will talk about is a different solution than we are used to. It's not the solution as solving a problem. It's something different than solving a problem. It's another kind of solution. So it's not the solution we are used to have when we have a broken pen, for instance, and we give it to an expert to fit it. This is another kind of solution. So the systemic approach is one approach that I will present from a German group, Matthias Wager von Kiewet and Inse Sparrer. I'm not sure if you know about it. If in an American scientific field, if this is already here, systemic approach is a buzzword in German-speaking countries, I could say, for at least for consultancy. So everybody working in consultancy is trying to learn systemic approach, trying to understand how to work with it, because there are a lot of new possibilities when you use this kind of approach. So I thought it would be a good opportunity here to talk about this approach here, so that maybe you have also the opportunity to know something about it, or you have it already. So I would love to hear how you have this connection to systemic approach. For instance, yesterday I had the feeling that you work, for example, with solution-focused questions, as a question at the end, what works? So it was very interesting for me to see, okay, here is also this kind of thinking. So I think we will learn from each other. So we'll talk about systems, knowledge, and solution, and all of this I would ask you to see this for the next 30 minutes from the perspective of communication. This is the perspective I come from. This is my PhD I made in communication science, and so I would ask you, it is not the only way to see it, but to see it now from the perspective of communication. Yes, I'm sorry. I will try. I will try. I know I have not very loud voice. So an overview, what I will talk about today, social systems. Oh, actually I got a pen and I would love to use it. So yes, yeah. So system and social systems, and the difference when we are talking about this both kind of systems. When we are talking about social systems, we have to talk about communication. And complexity is also a good thing to talk about when you're talking about this. Systemic approaches, there is a large field, but I would emphasize structure and form this time to get to know a little bit, or to talk about knowledge in this context. And then finally to talk about about what solutions are we searching in this case. System. If someone were to analyze current notions and fashionable catchwords, he would find systems high on the list. The concept has pervaded all fields of science and penetrated into popular thinking, jargon, and mass media. This was the first sentence, the first sentence of the first chapter of the book General System Theory from Buttel and Fee. And I would say we are in the same situation many years after that. We love to talk about systems, I think, and everybody talk about systems on the mass media. Everywhere you can hear the word, you can read the word system, you can see everybody's talking about systems, but few people really try to define, try to understand what is it, what is a system. I know you all are probably systems experts, but I would like to give a common perspective now that we can have a level of understanding what I am talking about. First, the need of systems or system theory. I would say one of the most important points. We talked about it yesterday too. Why do we need a system theory? After a functional differentiation, and when we got to divide our knowledge in different areas because of the amount of data, so that we got in earlier times the university was universal, so you learned everything, and with time, so they got to specialize the fields, and with this increasing specialization, we got a lot of new information, not a lot of new knowledge, but at the other hand, on the other side, we couldn't communicate with each other anymore. So what Buttel and Fee was seen by that time is we have the same problem still, but he says the consequence of this dividing in different areas is that the physicists, the biologists, the psychologists, and the social scientists are, so to speak, encapsulated in their private universes, and it's difficult to get word from one cocoon to the other. We were talking about this yesterday. So systems everywhere. This is also a title of one chapter from Buttel and Fee. He pointed out that there are different kinds of systems. So solar systems, for instance, homeostasis system, so that's more what we can describe as a cybernetical loop, or I don't have the word now, but it's not so important. Also ecological systems, atoms or cells, and also a social system. So this is not all kinds of systems, but just that we remember that when we talk about systems, that there is a lot of kinds of systems, and it's good when we tell the word that we also define what are we talking about, because everybody can have another idea what is it. So in order to have an understanding, it's good to define. In attempts of a definition, Bartholomew tried to put all the efforts in making systems theory. He tried to put everything together and to make a general system theory. And he figured out some fundamentals from systems, and two of them are here. A system would be a complex of interacting elements. So most important things, there are elements in the system, and they interact with each other. This is the case in all systems, also the other ones that we were seeing before. A system can be also seen as an organized complexity. So everything that's got too complex, and it's organized in some way, it has some structures, some communication structures, could be also named as a system. Maybe circumscribed by the existence of strong interactions or interactions which are non-trivial and non-linear. That's what cybernetics works on. It's also from Bartholomew. So social systems. Sorry. To the social systems. I had a very hard time to cut everything from social systems theory because this was the first system theory, as the social system theory was the theory which whom I fell in love for the first time as I went in this field. So I could speak about it my whole life. But I know it would be not very interesting, or maybe it would, but we have not the time. Therefore, I tried to put it in some small pieces. I hope we can get a level of understanding also when it's not the whole theory here. The social systems theory I worked with is the social systems theory according to Lucas Luhmann. According to him, social systems exist only in difference to their environment. So the difference that we were talking about yesterday, Professor Horn talked about this blue thing. Everything is blue, so we don't have the need to name something red, because there is no red, there is nothing, there is everything the same. As soon as we can observe a difference, we can form a thing. So they exist. So social systems. They are not objects that take with. How can we see them? How can we talk about them? How can we build a boundary or see what is a system and what is not? So it's Niklas Luhmann say this is only when we are looking at the difference to their environment, and social systems consist of communication. This implies so many things. I tried to put it this way. Niklas Luhmann says he worked on a theory for the whole society. So he explains the whole society in a very consistent way, and I think he came very close to it, closer as anyone else I know. And the thing is, most people criticize him because he says the society doesn't is not built by human beings. There is no human beings in society. There is only communication, and only this is society, and only this are the elements of social systems. So you can imagine how many things this implies when you think on society and you think about society and systems in this way. It's a totally different way to think about systems. And social systems are an autopoietic system, so they reproduce themselves, and then reproduce themselves using communication. So they exist as long they are communicating. When we stop to communicate, so there is no system. Okay, let's go further. If you have some questions, we can talk about it afterwards. So, but what is communication in this case? Because we have a lot of definitions of communication that can work for many, many things. For instance, there's one with the sender, the receiver, and then you send a message, the receiver takes this message and gives a feedback to the sender, for example. But communication, when we are talking about systems, social systems theory, could not be this way, because then it wouldn't work. Communication for Luhmann is a unit of information, message, and understanding. And this implies also a completely different point of view or perspective of communication. This implies that communication is not the act of two or more people. It is only the act of the person who receives the information. So if someone understands, understanding is here not for the content of the information of the message. Understanding is to understand that someone else sent him a message, and in this message there is some information, even if this person didn't do it by intentionally. So that's why Vasconcelos says it's impossible not to communicate. So when you are here, you are communicating if you want or not, because or if you are not here, you can also communicate. You can also say you are not interested. So, but it depends how the receiver, for instance, me, for example, interpret it or observe it. So if I observe that someone is not here, that I was expecting that he was here, and I understand this as a message and an information that he is not interested on this, communication was established. And we had already an interaction system in this case. So you see that one thing implies others, and it gets very complex, this theory. So the problem is the linear models we had for communication, they were not powerful enough to deal with communication in a solution-effective way. So this the problem of the double contingency is also, it was something in communication that we are always having. We always decide what we want to say, how we will say something, and someone else decides, or the receiver decides how they want to understand it and what they will say or act in response of this, what we're saying. This is a problem of the double contingency. You are always deciding. You are deciding what to do, and the other one decided what to do with what you are doing, and you decide to do what he are doing, or he or she is doing, what with them, what you decided to do. So it's a circle. So, but in order to comprehend communication, you should talk about complexity. But before we do that, I just want to emphasize that there is also, when in communication, 3 dimensions. We always communicate in the social dimension, the temporal dimension, and functional dimension. Sometimes more in the one dimension, more in the other. But the social dimension is the dimension where we talk about the structures, the social structures, where we interact or communicate, emphasizing more the social interactions. Temporal would be our experience, everything we had till today, the past, and or what the possibilities we have in the future. And functional is the fact, all the facts we are talking about, what the information could be. Complexity is defined by Luhmann. You can call a system complex if it's so big that not every element can be linked with each other, and establishing relation must occur in a selective way. That means, in this context, complexity means required selection. You are forced to select. You have no option than to select. So that's complexity for Luhmann, or in this context of social system theory. And the social systems are able to reduce complexity. For instance, the culture we have is a way to reduce complexity. So I know how to behave in some context, and so I don't have to think about it every time I go to a seminar. How should I behave? So you are all sitting here and looking at me. Why are you not talking with your neighbor? Why are you not dancing or talking to telephone? Because in our culture, this is not the way we behave. So there is a lot of rules that reduce complexity. And the other side, it's increased complexity, because we have to we have to know the rules. We have to act with the rules. So, for instance, traffic rules. If everybody has a car and can drive around, for instance, my son is 8 years old. He drove for the first time on a play center these cars that you can. How to say this, can bump around. So he was so happy and said, "Mom, I can drive a car. It's no problem." And I said, "Yes, it's no problem to drive a car. The problem are the traffic rules, because you have to know everything, and you have to have at least be at least 16 here or 18 somewhere else to understand all the things and to take responsibility for that." So when you simplify something, when you reduce complexity, you are also adding complexity on the other side. That's an interesting point of view, because then we understand that we now have so many technologies to reduce complexity, and we live in a so complex world. I would say it was never in our history so complex than now, because we have so many possibilities, and we feel we have the must to work with it, to deal with it. So we are now on the systemic approaches, and then we have to give up a little bit from this social systems theory, because there are a lot of things that we use for the systemic approaches from the systems theory, for social systems theory. But in the systemic approaches, we are more in the practice. We are in a praxis of systemic work. And in this case, we have other definition of systems, a slightly other definition. And this is, in this case of the systemic approach of this institute from Matthias Wager and Insesparer, the definition from systems is left to the participants of the systems or to the consultant, how they want to organize the systems. Elements could be persons, could be human beings. Element could be a situation or a problem. An element could be organization or a system. So it's up to the practitioner or to the consultant or the participants of the system to define what is the system. And there's a very important thing, there is no right way to define a system in this systemic thinking. It's like a city. If you go for the first time to Vienna, for example, so I would like to greet you in Vienna, but if you go there for the first time and you walk around the city and you think, oh, that's so nice, and you come back home and you say, so I know the right way to know Vienna. Nobody knows this way. This is the right way. Nobody would come of this idea to say that. So it's the same for systems. There is no right way to say it. There's a lot of different ways to know a system. So to know an organization, a family, a team, whatever. The system approach is difficult to define because when you define it, you are giving a right way. 5 minutes. Oh. Well, Matthias defined it in many steps. I will take only 2. The first step, he says, A is more systemic than B, and A stands here for an intervention on a method, things like that. A and B stands for that. So, for instance, an intervention is more systemic than B if A permits in a higher degree than B to abstain from attributing properties to elements. But what instead? So properties to element would be my boss is a bad boss, or he's a good boss. I have a good team worker or not. This is a property to elements. But if I have an intervention that doesn't work like that, instead permits in a higher degree than the other intervention of attributing properties to elements, instead of attributing properties to elements, to look at relations, at structures, at the context of structures, and of the variation of the context of structures. Also, for instance, the weather. If you have good weather, maybe it's harder to work. So the structure changes because maybe people don't come for the meetings, things like that. So you have you have to. If you are working systemic, you are more systemic. If you look at this, how to say, at this point, so relation, structure, context of structures, and variations of context of the structure. So since I have almost no time, I will structure and form. We can talk about it later. It would be nice, but I think we can talk about later. So knowledge as a model. We have a lot of definitions of knowledge. My PhD was in knowledge management, so I was at the beginning I was lost because it was plenty of definitions for knowledge. I would like to use this one as information is a difference that makes a difference. This is the one side of the story. The other is knowledge is a dynamic would be a dynamic model of reality consisting of former information. Why former? Because information in this kind of information is just for a moment. It's just in the moment it makes a difference. It is information. After that, it's not information anymore. It's maybe data, and knowledge consists also as reference structures and build its structure in difference to known knowledge, so everything else, in relation to something. For example, this thing. Good. So you are on the solutions. That's good because it's almost the end. All the facts belongs to the task, to the problem, not to the solutions. This says Wittgenstein. The solution of the problem of life is seen in the vanish of the problem. So now we have our solution. We don't need more facts to solve a problem when we are talking of the problem of life. There's a different thing when we are talking about the problem is something is broken. If we are talking about problem of life, we just need that the problem vanished, the problem is gone. So sometimes we can't. If you add more facts to the problem, it just doesn't work. I can't find a solution. So that's the basic point of view to get solution-focused work. I would have a nice anecdote to this one, but let's go further. So this is the Steve Shazer and Inso Kimberg were the two ones that worked on solution-focused therapy, and these ideas were taken in systemic work in Munich. And they worked with questions. They work with questions and language. The emphasis away from problem-focused relations and try to build constructive solutions. They use a language that implies the will for change, capability, creativity, etc. And yeah, we are finished now. And the thing is, the whole work on solution-focused work, the main tools are questions. Questions are perceived as better ways to create open space to think about and evaluate situations and solutions. So you have, with questions, you don't give someone an answer, you don't give someone a way to go, you give them an opportunity to take another perspective and to find the way he or she wants to go. And solution focus emphasizes the way of thinking and not a set of techniques. So these are good. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.